We're going to end on enchantment as a way of life. So we started generally, and we're going to end the series generally. We shall close by considering what it might mean to live a life which stays open to, honours and resolves to work with enchantment, and which learns from it as an experience of truth about the other. I will suggest that such a life, in embracing the value of enchantment, entails a commitment to defend its conditions and dynamics, the ones we opened these classes with. Relationality, humility, wildness, and so on. So enchantment as a way of life isn't only personal and private, it has serious implications for our relationships with the world, especially the natural world, whose enemies are also enemies of wonder. Now I'm about to make a very overarching set of statements, and it's all very nuanced, of course. There's a lot to unpack, as they say, in academia. We live in a world that seems to be disenchanted, not universally disenchanted. Such a thing doesn't exist. Enchantment always thrives in places. But it's a world that is becoming more difficult to experience moments of enchantment, moments of wonder. We are distancing ourselves from nature, and I would argue from that sense of cultural heritage as well. We are disembodying ourselves as ecological and embedded beings. We cannot afford to lose our connection to nature. And I've written about this, of course, in a variety of ways. All kinds of associations here. From a relatively small scale, on the individual personal level, we're losing our attention spans, our ability to connect and to perceive nature via the dominance of social media. Social media can be, of course, helpful in certain ways, but losing our attention spans, especially for younger people who seem to be perennially on platforms like TikTok and whatnot, these kind of this low grade reaction or sort of interaction with the world is doing damage to the way that we perceive things. Everything is becoming fragmented, disjointed. We no longer have, as someone like Byung-Chul Han would say, time for the other. We need a revitalization of the other. And as Han would say as well, there's a proliferation of non-things. Everything is becoming digitized, and it's really the end goal of the modernists, who wish to detach from reality, the reality of being an ecologically, being embedded as an animal in this world, which is an ecological world. It's full of brimming with relationships. We cannot disconnect. We need that vital tethering. It's a kind of Promethean desire to transcend from the world, to ascend to a higher place. The Promethean goal of the technocrats, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Peter Thiel. Just a little side note, Peter Thiel is is a ridiculous man as far as I'm concerned. A venture capitalist who apparently unironically calls his businesses things like Palantir Technologies. I think there's one called Lembas Ventures or something. There's a whole host of them based on the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. It's quite insulting, in fact. It's a mockery of what Tolkien really stood for. But yes, the Promethean technocrats, these people who want to, again, transcend from our earthly limits of uploading our bodies to the cloud and, again, just being disembodied. And of course, there's a lot of things to say here about the value of science and the value of progress in medicine and whatnot. But I think it comes down to, no matter how difficult your experience is of being in a body, being embedded, that's what we have to live with. We can't not be animals. And so now, just turning to a more specific point about enchantment and learning to live with enchantment or to work with enchantment. Patrick mentions a writer called Freya Stark, whose term fearless receptivity is important here. I think I understand this to mean it's the openness to subjectivity and agency, and again that links back to animism. In this word, fearless receptivity, I find value in it. It kind of accords with a way of thinking that I've been trying to cultivate as I've grown older, of humility and openness, although not too open-minded that you can believe in anything, of course, but it's that humility and openness to other possibilities in all kinds of ways. Just one of the more important ways, I suppose, is that movement from atheism, kind of an absolutist atheism, to agnosticism. It tells us that we need to value our home, which means valuing the body, defending it against dematerialization, defending it against the machine metaphor. This idea that we are simply machines, that's not an assertion that can ever really be proved in a way. We're not algorithms. We don't live in that way. It's a very important point that I've come to appreciate more and more as time goes on. That we live not in this reductive way. It's interesting. It can be valuable to know how things work, but we perceive things in wholes. That is the way we live. I think Wittgenstein said, and this I'm taking this from Curry, but I've been reading some of Wittgenstein's works, and he says that physiological life is not life, by which he means our inner workings, our inner structure, the physiology of the human form. We are not the cells that make up our bodies, really, because in our perception of things, we take things as wholes. And so I think what I really want to say is that we should strive to live in connection with deeper meaning, mythic meaning. The world, as Curry says, is independent of our will. It can't be controlled. The world is enriching but perilous. It's fairy. When we are enchanted, we live in fairy. And something that I'll end on is a figure that I'm becoming more and more aware of. I hope to read Jan Zwicky, who is a philosopher, Canadian philosopher, which Patrick seems to really support, which is interesting. Zwicky says that there are two broad categories of living, and these actually correspond to enchantment and disenchantment, to simplify things. They also correspond to the Apollonian and the Dionysian, in certain ways. The lyrical mode is the enchanted mode, but the technological is concerned with the use of the will to make things happen. We live, however, in the domestic. It's where we actually live, and how we live. It's fascinating because it all accords with fearless receptivity and the middle ground and so forth. It's being open to the possibility of enchantment. It's not the well-driven, technological, utilitarian approach to life, but it's also not that complete escape into fairy and the desire for other worlds and the psychosis that comes with being completely detached from reality. The domestic is, as Patrick says in the class, it's really represented by the hobbits. The hobbits are of the earth. They are domesticity. They are dwellers. And they are different from, I think, the elves, which are the lyrical mode, and the technological, which might be the totalitarian, technocratic Sauron, or Sauroman, or Morgoth even. The iron will of modernity, the project of modernity, embodied in those figures and their lands even. So yes, I think we should strive to live in, to be in the domestic and open to enchantment and the lyrical. So some closing thoughts then. It was definitely valuable undertaking the course. I think it affirmed more than anything my feelings about enchantment. Of course, I'd read a lot of Patrick's work and loads of others in relation to Wonder and Enchantment. People that even don't necessarily even take enchantment in perhaps the best way. I think it was about affirming what I already knew, but also, of course, this course added so much to my own understanding of enchantment. Interesting is being in that space for 2 hours every Wednesday for 6 weeks, just hearing about these things, refamiliarizing myself with them, and also sharing my thoughts with people as well. Admittedly, it was difficult at times to ask such kind of stacked questions. I did tend to layer my questions a little bit. It got a little bit unwieldy at times, and perhaps I could have simplified things a little bit, but all in the name of passion, I think. All in the name of wanting to get my ideas across and, in a sense, to show what I had learned and to learn more. And on that point, I think it's humanity at its best, just being in that space and learning for learning's sake. It wasn't actually goal driven. I certainly wasn't there to gain anything from it other than to feel what is enchantment and to feel to be taught in a way by someone that values the subject and is always learning about the subject. And I think I need to do more things like this. I need to engage with more courses and just to speak more about my own feelings about the subject and others. So, this was something new for the channel, I think, and I hope you enjoyed it. So thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time.
Another way of looking at this question, I hope I'm circling back to enchantment as a way of life, repeatedly, trying to, is that if you take enchantment seriously, it arguably commits you to protecting the body, defending it against dematerialization, okay? Against being treated completely abstractly and mathematically and analytically, and as if an algorithm could replace it. It commits you to defending the female. I don't say the feminine. I'm not talking about gender stereotypes. I'm talking about biological sex, the reality of the feminine, the female, and the male, and maybe others as well, okay? But minimally those two. It commits you, I believe, to defending the earth, the integrity of the earth, the ecological integrity of the earth. This is a tough issue because I'm suggesting that it could make demands on how you actually live. For example, what you eat and what you don't eat. What you think it's okay to eat, or should I say, sorry, being a bit provocative, but who you think it's okay to eat and who you think it isn't. This is issues I struggle with as well, as much as anyone else. And in terms of the conditions that we started out with for enchantment, that I said enchantment favors certain conditions, okay, like loose boundaries but not rigid ones, and so forth and so on. Well, arguably, if you want to take enchantment seriously, it commits you to defending or protecting or befriending relationality, the importance of relationship as opposed to, let's say, essences. I'm pretty suspicious of essences, I have to say. At least I'm suspicious of the reality of essences which weren't formed through relationships. Pre-given essences, who has the right to say what they are and tell us what they are? Okay, particularly in a religious context. So defending the reality and the importance of relationality, defending the openness to being able, the openness to encounter, even if only in your own life, in your own mind and life and way of going about things, keeping that openness. We've already talked about this. Defending the wild. Okay, this relates to defending the earth, but it also is important because, as I've emphasized, enchantment is wild, so it has an elective affinity with wildness. Okay, even at a stretch, wilderness, but wilderness in this context, wilderness is terribly important ecologically, obviously, but wilderness is not, in a sense, not what's fundamental. What's fundamental is wildness. Meaning, life where it has not been completely instrumentalized by human beings for human purposes, solely human benefits and purposes, which incidentally always turn out to be the benefits for the benefit of a very few other human beings, not all human beings. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that much. So defending wildness, they want to pave over the last public park in this bit of the city you're living. This is to be resisted as much as possible. This is a loss of wildness and a potential loss of enchantment. And not just for you and me and other human beings, but for the birds, the insects, the plants, the trees. So, yeah, there are certain values implicit in enchantment here, which are important ones and worth defending. Another value and condition and source of enchantment is, I would say, just humility. Being suspicious of overweening authority and authoritarianism and dogmatism and unquestioned and unquestionable assertions, and arguing for, and at the very least, maintaining your humility and receptivity and openness, okay? Which is not necessarily easy to do, particularly in a noisy world, metaphorically speaking, where it can be very difficult to be heard. Sometimes everybody seems to be shouting. And the voices which get heard are the ones which shout the loudest and the longest. At the very least, if you value enchantment, you would want to do whatever you can to resist that, or subvert it, or get around it, or participate in other fields and forums where that isn't the case, such as this one, by the way. Finally, I think there's an implied commitment to defending the metaphoric truth, the reality of metaphorical truth. That is to say, a truth that says, this is that. You remember the classical example? Achilles is a lion. And resist the kind of response to that, the modernist response, which is say, well, which is he? Make up your mind. Is he a lion or is he a man? He's both. And that's a truth. That is a reality, even though it contradicts a literal sense of truth and a narrow understanding of logic. To say that everything is either A or B, it cannot be ever both A and B, or neither A nor B, and so on, okay? Which, that's how enchantment thinks. It thinks in metaphorical terms. It presents us truths as metaphor, in metaphorical terms, not a kind of knowing, not an epistemology. We're not talking about knowing metaphorically. We're talking about, we are metaphorical beings, and we live that way. So resist literalism, literal mindedness, resist the chop logic of deductive choice, either A or B, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You might actually be covering this, Patrick, later on, but I might as well ask it now because it's relevant to what you were saying earlier. Let's get my question up. So I was rereading your excellent paper in Pan, Enchantment in Modernity, and this question is about Pyrrhonian skepticism. Were you going to discuss that later on, just to make sure I don't tread over any of your
I
subject?
wasn't actually, but so do go on.
Excellent. So, in my understanding, just trying to simplify it a little bit, I understand Pyrrhonian skepticism to be, as you say, most conducive to enchantment due to its focus on openness, but also its kind of humane stance as well. And it's not to be confused, if I understand correctly, with dogmatic scientism
Mhm.
or caricatured as kind of postmodern relativistic chaos, I think you could perhaps describe it as. So it seems like it is a good way of, it does align with enchantment because it seems to affirm the need to cultivate the middle ground again, the third path, as with so much of enchantment. And you've just spoken about neither Apollonian and neither Dionysian.
Mhm.
It's also the same thing as it's between or opposing religious supernaturalism and secular mastery as well. So,
Mhm.
can you perhaps speak a bit more about Pyrrhonian skepticism because it's a very fascinating philosophy and it does seem to be, as you obviously know, very conducive to enchantment. And I'm reading more into it myself, and it's very interesting. So, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I can't go into it deeply, I don't think, but
Sure.
but Pyrrhonian skepticism is often confused and often deliberately by moderns confused with a dogmatic skepticism, which says that nothing is true, nothing is what it appears to be, etc. This is not humane skepticism. Humane skepticism of the like Pyrrhonian was intended to be, and as it was taken up, for example, and influenced people like Montaigne, uh, questions the degree of certainty with which you can know anything, and would maintain that in most cases, if you examine, nearly all cases, if you examine what you're asserting or what you think you know closely, there are almost always grounds to question it. The implications of skepticism are for your relationship with beliefs or with knowledge. They're not to say that the beliefs are necessarily false or the knowledge is untrue, but it says in how you handle these things, allow room for being wrong and allow other people room for being wrong too. That's why it has this potential to be humane, uh, because it says, hey, we're fallible beings, we're limited beings. So, of course, how could we have perfect knowledge? Uh, yeah, I think there's a lot of mileage in that philosophy or that way of life. Yeah.
Sure, and just to make sure, it's not skepticism to the point of again, just with the Dionysian mode. It's not all boundaries collapsing. There's no such thing as truth in a
No,
sense. It's just
no.
it's not that kind of hyperfluid. You still need boundaries and you still need a kind of a rigid structure to it. It's kind of in between those two
Yes,
modes, I think.
yes, yes. And if anything, skepticism in terms of its implications for how you proceed, how you behave, it's rather encouraging to some traditional forms of behavior because in the absence of perfect knowledge, these ones have sprung up. Um, we can change them, but we should be careful about changing them because there may be some good reasons why they have evolved. So, in a way, although it may sound odd, skepticism is friendly to tradition,
Mm,
more
mm,
friendly to tradition than otherwise.
sure, makes
Yeah.
sense. Thanks.